Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar to provide you with expert tips and strategies for the ACT. In the next hour, you're going to be guided through specifics of what to expect on ACT test day, and you'll also be given insider tips to boost your score. My name is Dr. Jennifer Winward, and I'm the founder and CEO of Winward Academy. We could not be more excited to partner with GradeSlam to be able to provide these additional resources and insider tips to our students around the world. Now, everything that I'm going to share with you in this webinar is based on my 20 years of experience coaching high schoolers, mentoring them through the ACT and through the college application process. So first you might be wondering, an hour is a long time. Is this webinar for me? So what I want to make sure that you understand is that these tips are going to be super helpful for you if you're taking the ACT as soon as this weekend. Maybe you're in the middle of studying for it and you're going to be taking the ACT in the next few months. Or it's even going to be helpful for you if you're just starting to think about the ACT. Maybe you don't know if the ACT or the SAT is better for you. You kind of want an overview about what to expect. So regardless of kind of where you are in your ACT prep process, what we're going to be going through together is going to be excellent information for you to just better understand what to expect on test day, what types of concepts come up on the ACT, how are they tested, and then also some great tips for success. So let's do a quick overview of the agenda. So first we're going to go through exactly what to expect on test day in terms of an overview of what is the order of each section, what is the timing, the number of questions, etc. Then I'm going to give you some general tips. So 4 absolutely not to miss tips to maximize your success on the ACT. And then I'm also going to give you a checklist for test day. So we want to make sure that you know exactly what to bring with you so that you're prepared. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to do an overview of the English, math, reading, and science sections. So we're going to show you what is tested and how frequently, and then also give you some example questions for each concept, and also give you the top 3 tips for success in each section. Before we begin, a quick reminder that if you're interested in more free tips and resources, please subscribe to our YouTube channels for Winward Academy and GradeSlam so that you are always up to date with the best tips and tricks for success. And of course, for those of you who are participating live, welcome again, and please feel free to ask questions anytime in the chat window. For those of you who are watching the recorded version of this webinar, you can always feel free to leave a comment if you have questions. A quick reminder on behalf of GradeSlam, remember for all of you GradeSlam students, if you ever see an example question in this webinar and perhaps you want a little bit of extra help or support, you can always log into GradeSlam for that instant help that you're used to. And of course, to our Winward Academy students, welcome again. And you always have access to explanations and videos and all that you need to be able to review as well. So let's start with what to expect on test day. So the first thing I want to make sure you know is that you're going to show up around 7:45 or 8 a.m., but the test isn't actually going to start until probably closer to 8:45. So by the time you get there, they move everyone into the rooms. The proctor has to go through a standard set of instructions, which take a while to read. They have to pass out the tests. They have to check to make sure that people don't have notes with them and all of those types of things, right? And that can take some time. So the first thing I want to make sure you know is that yes, English is your first actual timed section on the ACT, but it's not like you're going to show up at 7:45 and start English at 8 a.m. Be prepared to show up and have about 45 minutes to an hour to keep yourself calm and keep yourself focused before the actual test starts. So the first section, as I just mentioned on the ACT, is the English section. 75 questions. There are 5 passages with 15 questions each. For those of you with regular time, you get 45 minutes for the English section. For those of you with 1.5 extended time, which I am listing here because it's the most common accommodation that students receive, you will get 70 minutes. After the English, you go straight into math and no breaks. The math section on the ACT is 60 questions, all multiple choice, all calculator. So that's a huge difference between the ACT and the SAT. The SAT also has both calculator and non-calculator, and it has multiple choice and grid-in format. The ACT is different. You get a calculator the whole time, and every single question is multiple choice. Now, after you do that back-to-back English and math, which you'll notice is, about 2 hours that you're going straight with no break, you do get a 10-minute break for those of you with regular time, a 15-minute break for those of you with extended time. Now, when you come back from that break, you have reading and science back to back. They're both 40 questions and they're both 35 minutes each. Those of you with extra time, it is a 55-minute section. So what I want to make sure that you see here on this screen is that you're basically having to focus for over 3 hours straight, and you get one 10-minute break. That means that 10-minute break is critical. You need to stay sharp. Whatever you do, do not put your head down on your desk and think, oh, I'll just take a nap for 10 minutes. That's the worst thing that you can do because it'll shut down your brain. You want to get up, move around, use the restroom, put cold water on your face, have a snack, a healthy snack, right? Something that's going to give you some good energy. Don't want to overeat, don't want to drink too much water. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what I really want you to see here is that part of doing well on ACT test day is being able to stay focused for hours and hours, right? You have to be able to be prepared that you get one 10-minute break. That's it. Now, for those of you who are taking the optional writing section at the end, you would have about a 5-minute break after the science. Then they would pass out the booklets for you to write your essays in, and then you would have a 40-minute writing section after the science. For those of you taking the ACT without the essay, what you're looking at right now is exactly what you would see. All right, so let's go through those general tips for success. Number 1, on the ACT, don't you ever, ever, ever leave a question blank. There is no penalty for guessing. That means that you should never leave anything blank because you have nothing working against you if you just go for it and guess. Now, let's talk about guessing for a second. If you can eliminate some answer choices that you know are wrong and you can make an educated guess, of course you should do that. But if you look at a question and your immediate reaction is, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to solve this, or if you run out of time and so you're not even going to have a chance to attempt a question, then of course you should not leave it blank and you should guess, and statistically you should always guess the same letter. That's really important because I've had a lot of students, right, who get excited about bubbling and they want to make cool zigzag patterns with the bubbles. Do not do that. When you guess on the ACT, you should guess the same letter always. So for example, if I'm on the math section and I've run out of time with 5 questions left, I should put A. Wait, did I just say that 4 times? A. Sorry, if I have 5 questions, 5 A's, you want to always guess the same letter, and that's really, really important because statistically you'll have a better chance of getting them right. Another big tip for success, I've seen so many students who show up for test day and they're confused and they think that they're not allowed to write in the booklet. You are absolutely allowed to write in the booklet. It is yours, and in fact, I would be upset if you did not write in the booklet. Take notes on anything that you need to. Draw figures for the math questions. Take notes, in the margins as you're going through the reading or the science section. Practice underlining or circling if that helps you pull out key information as you're going through the passages. So write in the booklets. When you see an answer choice that you know is wrong, physically cross it out. Do anything that you can to engage with the material and make it easy for yourself to be successful. The last general tip that I want to share is that when you are doing timed practice, never do time practice without also practicing bubbling a Scantron. That means that when you are sitting down and you're going to do a practice math section for an hour, do not only have the booklet with the math questions. You need to have the booklet with the math questions and the Scantron. You have to practice bubbling because it takes time, and students, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times they've accidentally bubbled the wrong letter. They get A for the answer and then they accidentally bubble B. Well, guess what? ACT is going to take what you bubble, not what you put in your booklet. So you better make sure that you practice bubbling. Again, it takes time and it's very easy to make mistakes, especially if you skip a question and then you forget to skip on the Scantron. right? Chaos can ensue and it can be very stressful. So I want to make sure that when you're doing time practice, practice the bubbling at the same time. All right, so last thing before we get into the meat of the English, math, reading, and science sections, I want to go through a test day checklist. So what do you need to bring with you? Now, this first column has everything that you must take with you to make sure that you're even allowed to take the exam, right? So you have to bring a photo ID, your registration ticket. Make sure that you have directions to your site. I always recommend that students do a dry run to the test site a day or two before the real test. Right, be prepared to know exactly how long it takes to get there, especially if you're using public transportation. You want to be really careful, especially too, because weekends can have very different bus schedules and train schedules than during the week. So be prepared to be on time, and by on time, I mean early to your test site. So make sure you know exactly where you're going and feel free to go there in advance if you're not taking the test at your own school and you just want to make sure that you know where to go. Always be prepared with 3 or more number 2 pencils. Bring a calculator, of course, you get one. There's no reason not to use one. It will only help you. Now, the second column is to give you support with kind of some extras that aren't necessarily required, but are just recommended. So if it will help you to keep time, right, you don't really know where the clock will be in the room. It might be hard for you to see. It might be behind you. Just have something on your wrist so that you can follow along and track time. But again, if you're going to wear a watch during the test, you need to practice wearing a watch during a practice section, right? So don't just show up day of and wear a watch for the first time. When you're doing your time practice and you've got your Scantron, do everything you can to emulate the real testing conditions and practice with a watch in advance. Also, it cannot beep. If you have anything that beeps during test day, they will cancel your exam and take it away from you. So make sure you're wearing a watch that is not going to beep. Always best to be prepared. Bring a pencil sharpener, bring an eraser. You never know when you might sneeze or need to blow your nose. Always nice to have some tissues. Snacks are critical for that one break that you get in the middle. Some good ideas for snacks, maybe, celery with peanut butter, hard-boiled eggs, maybe some trail mix or dried fruit or half a sandwich. Something like that that's going to give you some nice sustained energy but not give you just a spike in sugar. And also not make you too full, right? I don't want you to eat some huge meal and just shove it down as fast as you can, because then you might get a stomach ache during the reading and science. Bottled water is great to bring. Again, think moderation. You don't need to chug a liter of water during the break, because then during reading and science, you might be uncomfortable if you need to use the restroom. So again, water is great, but you should show up hydrated so that during the break, you can just have a small amount of water just to kind of feel refreshed, but without necessarily chugging a whole lot. Last but not least, for test day checklist is a comfortable outfit. So comfortable outfit is important because you don't really know what to expect. The room might be hot, it might be cold, so you just want to be prepared for whatever might come your way when you show up that morning. All right, so next we're going to go into the super meat of this webinar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each ACT section. So we're going to go through the English, the math, the reading, and the science. For each one, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. So the idea is that I'm going to show you, how long is the section, how many questions are there, what is tested the most frequently. I'm going to give you example questions for each concept, and then I'm also going to let you know how many points each concept is worth. So again, this is really where we get into the core of what is most important for you to understand for what to expect on the exam. So the ACT English, as we already discussed, 75 questions, 45 minutes. So let's again go through this kind of breakdown by question type. So first, I just want to make sure you all know where this pie chart came from. So because I've been tutoring for 20 years, I've been saving real ACT exams during that time. And I did an analysis of 55 real ACTs from the past 2 decades, so from the past 20 years. Every single question I broke down by lesson and topic, and then I did a statistical analysis to be able to provide these data to you that do this full breakdown of exactly what % of the time certain concepts are tested. So what you'll see is that the number one most frequently tested concept on the ACT English is punctuation. What do we mean by punctuation? We mean things like rules of commas, periods, semicolons, colons, dashes. Here is an example question of punctuation, right? You can see that to answer question 26, you need to know rules of commas and semicolons, or do we just want no punctuation, right? Those are the types of questions that you should expect. Now, out of the 75 total questions on the ACT English, about 17 or 18 of them, right, a lot, are going to be on punctuation, which means that punctuation alone, your accuracy on punctuation, will bring you 9 to 10 points out of the 36 total. What does that mean for you? That means that your number one priority when you start studying for the ACT English is to figure out your accuracy on punctuation questions. And if your accuracy is low, you need to do that lesson and you need to get those skills up, because again, you will garner a lot of points from accuracy on punctuation questions. The next most frequently tested concept, usage and mechanics. So with 21%, right, that means that pretty much 1 out of every 5 questions is going to be on this topic. By usage and mechanics, I mean things like avoiding redundancy, revising a sentence to achieve a specific goal, moving, deleting, adding, those types of questions. Here's an example of one type of usage and mechanics question in which you're being asked to pick a word that achieves a specific goal of the author to emphasize that something is complex. So again, only one of these answer choices is really going to emphasize the complexity. So your job is to pick which one is complex. Now, out of the 75, you're going to see about 15 to 16 questions from this topic of usage and mechanics. That means you're looking at 6 to 7 points total coming from this topic. What's next? Well, next is basics but essentials at 11%. So out of the 75 questions on the ACT English, you'll see about 8 or so from this category. Basics but essentials, we mean things like the difference among its, and its, your, to, than versus then. One quick aside, by the way, in an ideal world, you all know all of these rules, not for the ACT or SAT, but for every day, for your writing, for your text messaging, for your emails, for your professional communication, right? When you sit down and start to kind of grind with doing this ACT prep and you're going back and reviewing all of these old rules, remember, yes, you need to know it for the ACT English section, but it's also just good to know for your everyday writing. Right, so here's an example of a basics but essentials question that's testing you on the difference between than and then, but you'll notice that it's also testing your knowledge of apostrophes. So I wanted to show you this question so that you know that some questions are going to test multiple skills in one. Now, as we already discussed, 11% of questions, you're looking at about 7 or 8 questions out of the 75. That's going to bring you 3 to 5 points out of the 36 total. The fourth most frequently tested ACT English section is agreement. So we see 8% of questions are going to test you on things like subject-verb agreement and pronoun agreement. So here's an example an example question number 9, testing you on subject-verb agreement. So with 8% of questions on this topic, you're looking at about 5 to 6 questions total. So that's going to bring you 2 to 3 points out of the agreement topic. The fifth most frequently tested English concept is pronouns. So we see 7%, right? So pretty much the same amount as agreement. By pronouns, we mean things like the difference between who and whom and whose and whose. But we're also referring to things like pronoun ambiguity and pronoun case. So here's an example of everyone's favorite pronoun question, which is on the differences among who, whom, and that. You will see questions like this one, right, testing you on your knowledge of pronouns about 5 times total out of the 75 questions. That's going to bring you 2 to 3 points. Okay, so now that you have a sense of kind of the point values that you can get from these top 5 most frequently tested English concepts, next, I want to review the top 3 tips for success on English based on the common mistakes that students make. So your number 1 tip for success on ACT English, of course it comes from punctuation because it's the most frequently tested lesson, is that you should never put a comma between 2 complete sentences. So if you look in this example question 39 and you look at option D as in dog, you will notice that the option, or that answer choice, puts a comma after the word caves. Now, if you look at it carefully, to the left of that comma is a complete sentence. Some of these blue holes open to small contained caves. Then if you look to the right of the comma, it is also a complete sentence. Others open to miles-long interconnected tunnels. Well, guess what? That means that option D, as in dog, is incorrect because you can never, ever, ever put a comma by itself between two complete sentences. You have to learn these rules. Again, the answer here would be C as in cat with a semicolon, because a semicolon you would put between two complete sentences. Speaking of semicolons, the second most important tip for ACT English is that a period and a semicolon are like identical twins. So what do I mean by that? I mean that a period and a semicolon are identical. So if you look at a question like number 47, and you look at answer choices B and D, B as in boy, D as in dog, we see the same exact words, tall they, tall they. Option B has a period between the words. Option D has a semicolon between the words. Well, guess what? Neither B nor D is the right answer because they're identical to each other. Tall period they and tall semicolon they are the same, which means neither can be right. So if you learn this trick that a period and a semicolon are exactly the same, they're like identical twins, they both go between two complete sentences, then when you look at a question like this one in 47, it becomes a lot easier for you because you can immediately cross out B and D, and then you can just compare A and C to see which one is the right answer. All right, number 3 top tip for success on ACT English comes from usage and mechanics. Again, makes sense because it's the second most important concept in terms of what's tested the most frequently. What do I mean by never repeat anything? I mean, if you look at question 46, where it says that although both were built as walls intended to defend the city protectively. Guess what? If you're trying to protect the city, it is the same meaning as defend the city. You do not need to say both. You don't need to say defensive walls for defending, because the definition of a defensive wall is that it does defend the city. You don't need to say H, walls to provide defensive protection, because again, you don't need to say defensive protection. Protection by definition is defensive. So options F, G, and H are all wrong because you're repeating information. The answer to 46 is J. It's short, sweet, and to the point, and it preserves the intended meaning. Usage and mechanics, this idea that you should never repeat anything, is critical, and it's also really easy because once you learn it, it's very easy to spot. Okay, so final takeaways for the ACT English. Number 1, it's the first section that you'll do on the ACT. Those of you with regular time have 45 minutes, extended time with 1.5 extended time, you have 70 minutes. Neither students with regular time nor with extended time will get a break after the English. You will go straight into the math. And speaking of math, let's go ahead and continue with the tips and tricks to the ACT math section. So let's begin with reviewing that the ACT math is 60 questions in 60 minutes. Now, the most common kind of category for math questions on the ACT is solving algebraic equations. So by that, I mean things like f of x, linear systems word problems, combining units, solving multiple linear systems, kind of those types of topics. You'll see here is an example of the most frequently asked question on the ACT, which is solving for f of x, and in this case, asking you to solve for f of 3. So questions like these in this category of solving algebraic equations will come up about 13-ish times out of the 60 math questions. That means that they're worth 6 to 7 points on the ACT math section. Okay, what's next after solving algebraic equations, so nearly tested the same amount, is algebra fundamentals. So with algebra fundamentals, I mean things like key definitions like a prime number, an even number, greatest common factor, least common multiple, how to combine fractions, like how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions, FOIL, factoring, exponents, radicals, absolute value, inequalities, those types of concepts, right? And what you can see here is that those top two categories, solving algebraic equations and algebra fundamentals, right? It's going to be critical for you on ACT and SAT that you're retaining that information in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, right? It will come back on the ACT or SAT, and to be honest, it also comes back in calculus in a major way. So you definitely need to make sure that you're really, really learning these algebra concepts as you go. So here's an example of a FOIL question. This would be one that is in this category of algebra fundamentals. Now for all of those examples that I gave you, like FOIL, factoring, exponents, radicals, etc., you're going to see about 13 of those out of the 60 total, which means you're looking at 6 to 7 points coming from algebra fundamentals. Next, on the ACT loves asking about circles and triangles. So what do we mean by that, right? Circles, they love asking about area of a circle, circumference, the equation of a circle. For triangles, they love asking about area, Pythagorean theorem, special right triangles, SOHCAHTOA, all that fun stuff. You'll usually see about 9 questions out of the 60 that will relate to this category of circles and triangles, which means that you're looking at 3 to 5 points out of the 36 coming again from your performance on these circles and triangles questions. The fourth most common question type on ACT Math comes from geometry and graphing fundamentals. The ACT loves testing really, really fundamental concepts from geometry. So things like a coordinate plane, inscribed angles, parallel lines cut by a transversal, equation of a line, slope, distance formula, midpoint formula, kind of the main graphs like x squared, x cubed, absolute value of x, and then what does it mean if you're moving them up, down, right, or left, right? So those are kind of the concepts that are in this category of geometry and graphing fundamentals. Here's one example of that category question with this slope question. Now you'll see these about 8 to 9 times total out of the 60 questions. So again, you're looking at about 3 to 5 points coming from your knowledge of these geometry and graphing fundamentals. The fifth most frequently asked question type on ACT Math will come from these fundamentals of arithmetic. So things like mean, median, and mode, percents, probability, ratios, permutations, combinations, all of that fun stuff. Here's one example from the percents lesson right within this arithmetic fundamentals category. You're going to see about 7 to 8 questions coming from these different topics within arithmetic fundamentals. So we're talking about 3 to 4 points coming from this category. All right, so our top 3 tips for success in math, right? We went through those top 5 most frequently tested categories with an example question from each. So now let's go through our top 3 tips. Tip number 1, read the question carefully. Yes, it is a math section, but you need to read in the math section. Why is that important? Well, that's important because you're going to see long word problems like this one. You need to read carefully so that you're taking notes as you read. You need to read carefully so that you know exactly what the question is asking. That part is critical. I tell students all the time, solve the math question, you get your answer, go back and reread the question and make sure that you answered what it asked. Because I can't tell you how many times students kind of get programmed based on what they do at school. They do all this work and solve for x, and then they forget to read the question and see that the question asks for x plus 1 or x minus 1. And then, of course, that sneaky wrong answer choice is going to be there to trap you. So you must read the question carefully. It's absolutely critical. Number 2 tip for success in ACT Math, you have got to review algebra and geometry formulas. If you see a question like this one, which by the way is number 32, it's basically right in the middle, it's just that medium, that perfect medium level difficulty question. Because remember in the math, it goes easy, medium, hard. It increases in difficulty as you go. If you look at a question like this one in 32, if you remember the equation for area of a trapezoid, you're going to solve this question very quickly, like maybe in about 10 to 15 seconds. If you do not know the equation for area of a trapezoid, either you're not going to get it right, you're going to struggle trying to divide it into two different shapes, one rectangle, one triangle, find the missing sides, do Pythagorean theorem. You're going to waste time. Okay, so if you can show up and know and remember those critical formulas from algebra and geometry, then you're going to have a leg up, right? You're going to have an advantage when you see a question like this, when you just, again, boom, you know that equation right away. Third tip for success, you must watch for unit swaps. This applies, by the way, to the ACT and the SAT. They love changing units, like going from seconds to minutes or inches to feet. In this case, they're going from feet to yards. Notice that they put it in italics, right? They make it pretty obvious that they are switching the units. Yet still, students will struggle. They'll find the answer in feet, or in feet squared, technically, because we're finding area, but they'll find the answer in feet squared instead of in yards squared, and then, of course, they're going to get the answer wrong. So look out for unit swaps. They really tend to occur once you get to those medium hard level questions, right? This isn't something that you're going to see on question number 1. That wouldn't be fair, right? These unit swap type of questions tend to come up later when you get to the harder questions. Final takeaways for the section, or for the math section, excuse me. It is the second section, right? English is first, then math. Those of you with regular time, those 60 multiple choice questions, you will answer in 60 minutes, followed by a 10-minute break. For those of you with 1.5 extended time, you'll have 90 minutes, followed by a 15-minute break. And then remember, after that break, you better come back ready to go and ready to focus for the reading section. Now remember, in the ACT reading, you're going to have 40 questions that you must answer in 35 minutes. Now those 40 questions are coming from 4 passages that have 10 questions each. So let's first do a little overview of those types of passages. So on the ACT, the first passage will be prose fiction, the second passage will be social science, the third passage is humanities, and the fourth passage is natural science. Now, they will always come in that order, and part of the strategy for students is doing time practice and trying to figure out what is the best order for them to answer the questions in these, from these passages, right? So it's not always best to do them 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Depending on your strengths and your timing, it might make sense for your order to be 4, 2, 3, 1. I give you that example because that's my preferred order on the ACT reading. So I love natural science and social science. I do those first. So I do 4 and then 2. So I'm starting with what I really enjoy reading and where I kind of can read more quickly, really remember what I read, and just feel stronger. Then I do the humanities third, and then the last one that I like to answer is prose fiction. The reason I like to do that one last is because the prose fiction is usually cut and pasted out of a story. So there's a little bit more character development, character relationships, dialogue, kind of people are usually described in that section. So I find that if I'm feeling a little bit crunched for time at the end of the ACT reading, it's easier for me to kind of skim the prose fiction because it's more of a story. And again, you're kind of understanding the relationships among characters, what they say to each other, their attitudes. So for me, it's easier to do that one last because I can remember the story well when I answer the questions, and I can remember what I read and where, so it's easy for me to go back and find that information. Now, that's my order. That's not necessarily going to be your order. So again, just know that the passages on the ACT will always be in this order, and your job as you're doing time practice is to figure out where are you stronger, right? Where is your accuracy really strong? Do those first, and then always wait and save what you perceive as your weakest section for last. Because the idea is if you're going to run out of time on the ACT reading, and a lot of students honestly are pressed for time on the ACT reading, then you'd rather run out of time on the weaker section than on the stronger section. So that's why part of this process is really figuring out your order on the passages, again, to maximize your success. Okay, so let's view our breakdown of the top 5 most frequently asked question types on the ACT reading. You'll first notice that over half of the questions are about specific content from the passage. Here's an example question, right? Basically saying the narrator indicates that when he swam the 1,000-yard freestyle in the time trials, the world for a moment seemed to what? Well, they don't give you a line reference. They don't tell you where to look. But the expectation is that you remember, oh yeah, over here I read about when he swam the 1,000-yard freestyle. He said the world for a moment did what? So you would go back to the passage, find that place, and then you would answer the question, what happened? Did it speed up? Did it rush past? Did it go in slow motion? Or did it slow down? It will be explicitly stated in the passage. You are not to come up with your own idea or make an assumption. No, no, no. It is there in the passage. Your job is to remember where you read it, to go back and reread extra carefully so that you can answer the question accurately. Now, 40 questions on the ACT reading, over half are just like this. That means 20 to 21 questions and 16 to 18 points out of the 36 are going to come from you remembering, where did I read this? You go back and reread it to answer the question. The second most frequent question type on ACT reading would be a line reference question. You'll usually see about 7 of these total out of the 40 questions, so about 2 of these on average in each of the 4 passages. Line reference looks like this, tells you to go to line 80, answer a question about something that happens in line 80. Of course, you should note, you're not going to answer this question if all you read is line 80. You need to read a little bit before and a little bit after to make sure you really understand the context, then you can answer the question. So we get 5 to 6 points out of the 36 just from your accuracy on line reference questions. The third most frequent question type would be vocabulary in context. One note for you is that these questions are much more common on the SAT than they are on the ACT. Now we see here what you expect on one of these vocab in context. They will give you some sort of words, right? Named and nurtured. And then they tell you in the context of the story, what do these words mean? So that's what we mean by these vocab in context. You'll see something that looks like this. You'll see about 4 of them total out of the 40. So we're looking at 3 to 4 points out of the 36 from your accuracy on vocab in context. Next would be the paragraph main idea questions. Looks just like this. What's the main point of the last paragraph, right? This is a perfect example of a main idea of a paragraph type of question. You're going to see about 3 or 4 of these total out of the 40 questions. So we're looking at 3 to 4 points from this topic. The 5th most frequently asked question will be on comparing dual passages. Now remember I told you in the beginning there are 4 passages total. 3 of them are going to be in a single passages format, and then 1 of them is going to be in a dual passage format. So what do I mean by that? Well, a single passage, let's say, is 90 lines long, and then you have 10 questions about that one passage. The dual passage format, instead of having 1 long passage that's 90 lines, you would have 2 passages, so passage A and passage B, that are each 45 lines, right? So overall, you're still reading the same amount of about 90 lines. It's just that instead of it being 1 long passage, it's 2 shorter ones. So we see that about 7% of questions will ask you to compare those dual passages. So they'll ask you to compare passage A to passage B. These types of questions will bring about 2 to 3 points total. But again, for some students, that is their goal, is to bring up their reading 2 to 3 points. And they miss all of the comparing dual passages questions. When they recognize that and they practice this question type, they can see that jump in their score that they're hoping for. Okay, so now that we've gone through those 5 most frequently tested question types, let's explore those top 3 tips for success in the ACT reading. Now, hopefully you were able to glean this from earlier as I was giving you some other information about ACT reading, but number 1 tip, do not insert your own ideas. Your job on the ACT reading section is to find information in the passage and to reference exactly what is stated. So if you look at a question like number 7, you're not coming up with your own idea about the time trial in Houston. You're not assuming something. You're not making any type of statement about what you think is true. No. You are finding in the passage when the narrator specifically describes the time trial in Houston. You are not inserting your own ideas. You are finding information in the passage. Number 2 tip for success on ACT reading is to not necessarily answer the gist questions first when they are asked first. So what do I mean by that? By gist, I mean general idea, structure, and tone. What does the ACT reading section do that's sneaky, which by the way the SAT does as well? Well, let me show you. Here I have snipped the first question from the 4th passage. So remember, the 4th passage is on natural science. It's questions 31 through 40. So you'll notice I finished reading, right, line 85, 86, 87, 88. That's the end of the passage. And then question 31 is the first question being asked. But if you notice, it's asking me for the main idea of the passage. So what is the tip? Just because this is the first question being asked about the passage does not mean that you have to answer it first. You can go answer 32, 33, 34, etc., all the way to 40. Go answer all the specific questions about the passage. You're going to be going back and rereading. You're going to be digging in a little bit more, and you're going to better understand the main idea of the passage after you've answered 9 questions about the passage. So you can go back to question 31 and answer it last, even though it's even though it's asked first. Okay, sorry, let me say that again to make sure I'm being clear. You can answer the main idea question last, even though it is asked first. So again, just circle it, star it, draw arrows pointing towards it, whatever you need to do so that you don't forget, right? I don't want you to skip 31 and then forget to go back to it. But just remember, they're asking it first, but you don't have to answer it in that order, right? You can skip around to the other specific questions and then come back. All right, the third most important tip for the ACT reading has to do with those dual passage sections. And what I want you to do is answer them one passage at a time. So the biggest mistake that students make is they read passage A and then they read passage B and then they go to the questions. Do not do that. I want you to read passage A, answer the questions about passage A, then read passage B, answer the questions about passage B, then answer the questions about both. It's just going to help you keep the information better organized in your mind, and there's no reason to make it harder on yourself. There's no reason to read them back to back and then start the questions. Just read A, answer the questions about A. Read B, answer the questions about B, and then do the questions about both. Okay, final takeaways for ACT reading. It is the 3rd section. Remember, it's 40 questions. Regular time 35 minutes with no break. 1.5 time 55 minutes with no break, right? You're going straight from reading to science. So next, let's talk about the ACT science section. Same thing, we're going to go over those tips and tricks for success. So do that overview just like the reading, 40 questions, 35 minutes. You do get 55 minutes when you have extended time. What are the types of passages on the ACT science? So there will be 6 total. 2 of them are going to be figures and tables. So 2 of them will look like this, where you basically are given a figure and you're given a table, and then you're going to have 6 questions that ask you to find information from the figures and tables, or perhaps from that little paragraph above. The next type of passage is an experiments passage. You will have 3 of those with 7 questions each. So with those types of experiments passages, again, you're going to perhaps see a diagram that describes an experiment. Then it'll tell you kind of experiment 1 did this, experiment 2 did this, and then you're going to have different data. So it could be figures, could be tables to kind of describe what happened in each experiment. So the main difference between the experiments and the figures and tables is that the figures and tables, that's really the bulk of what you're given. With experiments, you'll likely also have figures and tables, but then there will also be more reading, like a little bit more context where you have to read about the experiment or read about the experimental design. The third passage type, there will be one of these with 7 questions, and that's the debating scientist passage. So with that, it'll look something like this, where you have multiple students who have multiple views on something, right? And your job will be to answer a question about what student 1 thinks, or what student 2 thinks, or how are students 1 and 3 the same, or 1 and 3 different. Those types of questions, right? Again, it's all reading. You have to read carefully to do well on the ACT Science section. You don't need to show up knowing physics and chemistry and bio. You need to show up knowing how to read, how to find information in figures and tables and graphs, and then of course how to extract information that's given to you in paragraph form. So let's go through, same as we did everywhere else, those top 5 question types on ACT Science. Number 1, they'll ask you to find details from figures, tables, or diagrams. A question will look something like this one in number 2, where it's just asking a very specific question based on figure 1. Your job will be to go to figure 1 and answer this question. We'll usually see about 9 questions like this out of the 40 total. Again, they're going to tell you exactly where to look, and we're looking at 6 to 9 points from this question type. Question type number 2, also very popular. 1 out of 5 questions are going to ask you to compare and combine data from multiple sources. So if you see here in question 14, right, you have to take information from experiment 1 and from experiment 2 to answer this question. So they're making you, again, extract data, but it's from multiple sources. So remember that first example I gave you, you only had to look in one place, just figure 1. For this example question, you have to look in 2 places. You have to look at experiment 1 and experiment 2 to answer the question. With 20% of questions like this, you're looking at 8 questions. On average, will look like this. So 5 to 8 points coming from your skills in comparing and combining data. Number 3 would be to understand elements of an experimental design. So basically what that means, it's likely going to be a long and wordy question, right? You're going to have to kind of read about what they did and then answer questions about why they did it. So to get these questions right, again, you have to read an experiment and understand what they did. Again, just reading, but then you need to be able to answer questions about those procedures. So with 12% of questions like this, we're looking at about 4 or 5 total out of the 40. Again, based on that very careful reading of descriptions of how experiments are designed. 4 to 5 points out of the 36 will come from your accuracy on these questions. Next, with the same amount, right, 12%, they're going to ask you to demonstrate that you understand very basic science terminology and content. So knowing an independent variable, a dependent variable, what is a control condition, what is a hypothesis, right? So these types of very fundamental concepts from science. Now, what I'm also going to do is show you a question. Again, these are very rare. So overall, demonstrating knowledge that you understand very basic terminology and content, you'll see about 4 or 5 questions like that, right? So we're talking about 4 to 5 points total. Now, this example that I'm giving you, you will see 1 like it, maybe 2. So I wanted to show it to you because we do kind of classify it at Winward Academy within this category. But you will see a question that actually requires you to know something from science. So again, my students challenge me all the time. I tell you, with ACT Science, you don't need to know physics, you don't need to know bio, you don't need to know chemistry. But 1, maybe 2 questions out of the 40. So again, you can still get a 35 or a 36 on the ACT Science, even if you miss these types of questions that are something very specific that actually requires scientific knowledge. It'll be something like opposite charges attract and like charges repel, or that Jupiter is the biggest planet. Those types of things that you learn really in middle school science classes. So for this one, number 35, you have to know that 0 degrees Celsius is the freezing point of water to be able to know that the answer is A, and that -1 degrees is below the freezing point of water. And therefore you wouldn't have water runoff, right? Water wouldn't be moving if it was frozen. So again, I'm showing you this question. It is not worth 4 to 5 points. It is an example of a category that's worth 4 to 5 points. But a question that actually requires knowledge of science, you're going to see 1, maybe 2 times out of the 40. Okay, last or out of our top 5 would be to find details about data or experiments in a passage or a text. So by that, you read question 27. It's asking you about the results of a study. Which one would you expect? Well, to answer this question, you're going to read words. You're going to have to read a passage. You're going to have to read text to be able to answer it. So you're going to see about 4 questions like this that are just super based on reading text to answer them. So about 3 to 4 points out of the 40. All right, so next is to go through those top 3 tips for success on the ACT Science. Tip number 1, trust the question. If they tell you, according to figure 2, then the answer has to be in figure 2. They're not allowed to say according to figure 2 and then the answer is in table 1. That's totally not allowed. So if it says according to figure 2, you should go straight to figure 2 to find your answer. Tip number 2, annotate. Remember I told you at the very beginning, the booklet is yours. You should write all over it. The reality in the science section is that you're looking at a lot of figures, tables, diagrams. If you need to underline, if you need to circle, if you need to take little notes to yourself, do it, right? Here's an example of how I've kind of jotted down some notes as I was looking up these 2 figures so that I could really understand and stay organized and keep the information very clear in my mind. Tip number 3 for the ACT Science, remember, it is just a reading section in disguise. You are not expected to show up and know how many temperatures were tested in experiment 1 and in experiment 2. That's not what's expected of you. What is expected is that you show up and you can read that in experiment 1, they tested these different metals at 30 degrees Celsius. Okay, well that means that there was only 1 temperature tested. But then if you look at experiment 2, they're testing at 10 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius, 40, and 50. So they're testing at 5 temperatures because when we look at the figure, we can see that there are those marks on the graph, right? 5 different times. So again, you're reading, you're looking for information, right? You're kind of like gosh, what is the word? I'm blanking out. Sorry. You're an investigator, right? They're asking you questions and then you're going to go search and find it by reading carefully and interpreting carefully and reading a figure and looking at the x-axis and the y-axis and just making sure that you're really, really careful. Okay, so final takeaways for the ACT Science. It is the last section. Again, this is if you are not taking the writing section. It will be last. It is the 4th section. Those of you with regular time get 35 minutes for the 40 questions. Those of you with 1.5 extended time get 55 minutes for the 40 questions. And if applicable, the next section is writing, right? So the next section is that essay section. For those of you taking the essay, remember it is optional, but a lot of the more competitive schools do require the essay. So you would want to take it to make sure that you have a score available. If you have checked and all of the colleges where you're applying for sure do not require the writing, then you don't have to take the ACT with writing. But if you're not sure yet where you're applying or if you're applying to more competitive schools, then you will need to take the ACT with writing. The writing section will be 40 minutes for those of you with regular time and 60 minutes for those of you with 1.5 extended time. Okay, so thank you for sticking with me with this hour-long webinar. On behalf of GradeSlam and Winward Academy, again, thank you for learning with us. Once again, I am Dr. Jennifer Winward. I'm the founder and CEO of Winward Academy. And again, on behalf of GradeSlam and Winward Academy, we wish you the best of luck on your upcoming ACT. Remember that you can always feel free to connect with us for more resources with insider tips and tricks to maximize your success and to prepare you for college and beyond. Thank you.